has enjoyed absolute power for the last 30 years. Across the border in Zimbabwe, ZANU PF have enjoyed absolute power for the last 44 years. The 29th of May 2024 elections in South Africa. So ANC denied the absolute majority it had enjoyed for 30 years. And ever since the results, that party's leaders have learned to know what the phrase eating humble pie means. This is a video of a recent panel discussion, I suppose, in South Africa, where DA were now in government with the ANC government as a coalition. We're making it abundantly clear that the days of ANC leaders behaving like a loose cannon are over. The DA is telling President Ramaphosa and his friends, their faces, we are not going to continue the pathetic and idiotic relationship that ANC had with ZANU PF. And rightly so too. ANC, the last 2 decades at least, has probed up ZANU PF for no other reason than the hope that by keeping ZANU PF in power, it will somehow delay the people of South Africa putting it out of power. This is how ANC was looking at it. The argument is if, and this actually happened, ANC leadership asked the deputy foreign minister, the ANC deputy foreign minister, to carry out an investigation of if the opposition was to win power in Zimbabwe. This is before or just after the GNU of 2008 to 2013. What repercussion would that have on South Africa? And the report came back and said, well, if the opposition was to win power in Zimbabwe, and it is almost certain that Zimbabwe's economy would improve, given the fact that the Zimbabwe economy has all but completely collapsed under decades of ZANU PF gross mismanagement and rampant corruption. South Africans would see that if you replace a corrupt and incompetent regime, things will change. Ever since the post-Mandela presidency, one successive government in South Africa under the ANC has shown to be corrupt and incompetent, and hence the reason why the South African economy has taken a nosedive. The ANC, instead of addressing those fundamental problems, decided, well, okay, we'll make sure that there's no regime change in Zimbabwe. We'll pretend that any regime change in Zimbabwe cannot be a result of the people of Zimbabwe wishing for regime change, voting for regime change. We will assume that the only people who would want regime change in Zimbabwe are the white Western detractors, as ZANU PF would call them. And so Zimbabwe found itself in a really difficult situation where they were fighting for democratic change at home, not knowing that they are also fighting the ANC government, a very big player in the regional body, SADC, who were determined to keep ZANU PF in power no matter what. I have expressed my outrage, and so have a few other people. At ANC 2022 Party Congress resolution that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. They knew that ZANU PF was going to rig the 2023 elections, just as the party had rigged elections in the past. And what they were saying to ZANU PF is, yes, you can go ahead and we will still grant you legitimacy, under the pretext that if you were to hold free, fair, and credible elections, those who have imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe will get their wish of regime change. That is a nonsensical argument, because we cannot say the people of Zimbabwe's right to free, fair, and credible election has got to be suspended because the West have imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe. That right is not negotiable. And yet here we are. South Africa was endorsing ZANU PF's position that that right is got to be suspended as long as there are sanctions imposed on the regime. Indeed, even if we were to accept that logic, ZANU PF has never held free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe, ever since the country's independence in 1980. We didn't have sanctions then. So this position of ANC that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe has been an insult to any thinking Zimbabwean. And of course, we are pleased to see that the people of South Africa have decided that they needed to cut ANC's arrogance and powers for their own reason. I mean, the South African economy, like I said, has been on its way to becoming yet another failed state. By the denial of South Africa of ANC government, the absolute majority that it had enjoyed the first 30 years of post-apartheid era, has allowed the voices of reason to be heard. And the results of the election was only just over a month ago. And already the voices of reasons are being heard. I have never seen Secretary General of ANC so thoroughly humbled as we see in this clip.
I mean, it's going to be almost impossible. Not our international relationship will not be associated with dictators, and ensure that these countries respect the rule of law. It's going to really be based off what is good for South Africa. Not that we will interfere directly in their affairs, but countries that actually does not respect the human rights of their own countries. We will make it really very clear. Like I can give an example that I always use. It's difficult for Asian SA to have relationships with ZANU PF.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Zimstream TV. Your one-stop source for all the latest news, analysis, and commentary on politics, social affairs, and religion. From breaking news to in-depth analysis, we've got you covered. New coalition vows to prioritize South Africa's interests, respect rule of law in international relations. In a significant shift in foreign policy, the new coalition government in South Africa has announced that it will prioritize the country's interests and respect the rule of law in its international relations. The Democratic Alliance, DA, a key partner in the coalition, has made it clear that it will not associate with dictators and countries that do not respect the human rights of their own citizens. According to the DA, the new approach will focus on promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in international relations. The party has emphasized that it will not interfere directly in the affairs of other countries, but will distance itself from dictators and human rights abusers. As an example, the DA cited ZANU PF and its leader, Emmerson Mnangagwa, who has a long record of human rights abuses.
That could not be any clearer. While the DA is saying we will not interfere in other countries' affairs, what we also got to deal with here is accept the reality that the ANC was interfering in other countries' affairs, in Zimbabwe's affairs, by coming up with such an unbelievable resolution that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe and propping up ZANU PF. They were not just interfering here. They were interfering to undermine rule of law, to undermine the continuous denial of the people of Zimbabwe their right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country, to undermine the people of Zimbabwe's right to have a change of this, to end this ZANU PF corruption and gross mismanagement. But the die is cast. There is no going back. The 29 May elections in South Africa have been a game changer. They're totally what we saw before happening in Zimbabwe and the unholy relationship with South Africa is over. We have turned a new page. As much as South Africa's ANC would have wanted to keep ZANU PF in power, we cannot do it anymore. We've turned the page. And needless to say, our friends in ZANU PF headquarters know that we've turned the page. Whether they care to admit it or not is irrelevant. they will know. Here is what another South African leader said about ZANU PF.
Negotiable. My fellow South Africans, we have a crisis taking place across our border. For years, our government has watched while ZANU PF destroyed a country once capable of feeding much of Southern Africa. This crisis impacts our country deeply, and it is now time for a new approach. It is time for hard diplomacy. We must adopt the strongest and harshest policies against an oppressive government and not punish the people of Zimbabwe. This should start by freezing the assets of ZANU PF leaders in South Africa and banning them from entering our country until there's real reform in that beloved country.
There it is. The writing is on the wall. The idea that somehow ZANU PF can continue to blatantly rig elections is over. I think for Zimbabwe, the opportunity to really end the ZANU PF dictatorship is there. We only have to open our eyes and take advantage of it. As much as outsiders like ANC have played their role in propping up ZANU PF, we cannot also deny that we have been our own worst enemy. 44 years after independence, there have been many golden opportunities to end this ZANU PF dictatorship. The question we've got to ask, therefore, is why did we fail? The golden opportunity to end the ZANU PF dictatorship was during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. The primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms that had allowed ZANU PF to blatantly rig the 2008 elections. We have a video clip of Mnangagwa boasting of how he interfered in the 2008 elections to recapture, to deny the people of Zimbabwe a meaningful vote. Let me explain. The 2008 was the nearest Zimbabwe had ever got to free, fair, and credible elections, ever since the country's independence. That year, SADC had worked behind the lines to put pressure on the regime to improve the electoral process. Significant changes were made that year. For instance, one of the things that was changed was that votes must be counted at the polling station and not taken to some center where experience showed in the past that between being taken from the polling station to the counting center, the ballot boxes, some of them disappeared, some of them got changed or whatever. This time they must be open, they must be counted, the votes must be counted and signed for at the polling station. It was a significant change. And when the results started to come in, so that's elections in 2008, the March 2008, it was clear ZANU PF was losing. and Mnangagwa, Emerson Mnangagwa, the man who is today's president of Zimbabwe, interfered. He stopped ZEC declaring the result. He and his gang then proceeded to count 5 million votes, and it took them 6 weeks. You don't take 6 weeks to count 5 million. And this is not, in fact, counting from scratch. This is recounting. But he did. Of course, he was whittling down the votes. They managed to change Tsvangirai's 73% of the vote, according to Mugabe's admission, to 47%, enough to force the runoff. And during the runoff, court named by Mnangagwa and Company, Operation Mafotera. The country was to see some of the worst electoral violence that we have ever known in our country's history. People were being punished for having rejected ZANU PF in the March vote. Millions were internally displaced. Hundreds of thousands were beaten, raped, and seriously injured. And over 500 were murdered by ZANU PF operatives, police, CIO, and prison services. They were all involved. Here is Mnangagwa boasting of his role in the
Constitution after every 5 years tunaenda ku Congress.
Sorry, that is the wrong tape.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters. Vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration. Vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose watofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati ndomamira zvakaita takatodini kateda sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaure navo baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zvinhu gadzirai chi cabinet. Asi nangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess.
We could listen to it to the end, but it doesn't really matter. What matters there is, here is an individual who today occupies the highest office in the land, who is openly admitting that he interfered in the electoral process in 2008. That he phoned Mugabe and told him, prepare for a cabinet. You prepare for a cabinet when you are losing? What are you going to do? Of course, he knew what he was going to do. This was the whole essence of Operation Mafotera Papi. He was never going to accept the results of the democratic wishes of the people of Zimbabwe. He was going to change it. And he did change it. What is disappointing is that SADC and the AU refused to accept ZANU PF as the winner of those 2008. And this is what forced ZANU PF to agree to the global political agreement of 2008 that gave birth to the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms so that the blatant cheating and the want of violence that marred the 2008 elections will never be repeated again. The gentleman we saw speaking to the end of that video clip was Morgan Tsvangirai, was the leader of the MDC. He went into the GNU, but they failed to implement even one token reform. In 5 years, some people have argued that no, they didn't occupy key ministerial positions. That has nothing to do with it. The process of implementing reforms did not require you to be a minister. You submit any member of parliament, any senator, any cabinet member, deputy minister, deputy prime minister, and the prime minister himself could submit a reform proposal during the GNU. It was for parliament then to fine-tune that reform proposal. And once they've done their bit, it will be for Mugabe to sign it so that it could be implemented. There was not one reform proposal submitted during the 5 years of the GNU. Morgan Tsvangirai and company, Mugabe bribed them. And they were so busy enjoying the trappings of high office, they forgot about the reforms. That is the fact. It is a pity that there are millions of Zimbabweans out there who, even today, with the benefit of hindsight, they still have no clue what the GNU was about. A country like that deserves the government we have today. We have got to take responsibility of the destiny of the country. And if you are that ignorant of what happened, no clue whatsoever, well, it goes to show why the country is in a mess. 44 years of rigged elections. We can stop it. And I think some of the changes that have happened, notably SADC damning reports of the 2023 elections, the changes in South Africa, all those things could contribute to helping open the door to finally end the 44 years of gross mismanagement, rampant corruption, and tyrannical rule by this ZANU PF regime, aided and abated, I must say, by the corrupt and incompetent MDC-CCC opposition. I refuse to accept the arguments some people would want to give, or the excuses some people would want to give about MDC's failures. It is a fact, it is a historic fact that they sold out on reforms and they've been participating in these flawed elections to give ZANU PF legitimacy out of greed. There are some things we can debate, but there are others which are historic facts. We should not be wasting time debating those things. Those are facts. Chamisa lied last year about plugging the vote rigging loopholes. He knew very well that he had not done so. He just wanted Zimbabweans in their millions to participate in the flawed elections, to give ZANU PF legitimacy, and to give himself and a few of the Triple C leaders who won the gravity seats, those gravity seats. The main problem here is the 2 million who actually voted for Chamisa in last year's elections because they believed the oxymoronic lie that he had plugged, the vote rigging loopholes. And the 2 million plus, particularly in the diaspora, who were cheering and applauding the participation. I stated before, and I'll state it again. I believe SADC would have found it impossible to do nothing about ZANU PF blatantly rigging the elections last year. They would have denied ZANU PF political legitimacy if the opposition had not participated in those elections. If Zimbabweans had not participated in those elections in their millions, we must make sure that we do not participate in 2028. We cannot stop ZANU PF rigging the elections. I'm sure we cannot stop Chamisa and company participating in those flawed elections. But what we can do is make sure that we are not conned into participating too. Thank you very much for joining me today on this chat. And I hope you'll be able to do it at 7 o'clock UK time and 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time today as well. Thank you very much again, and have a good day.